Welcome to the Digible Dudes Podcast. I'm here with Michelle. I always want to say Myers, but it's Michelle Smith now.
Yes.
Right?
Hello.
Yeah. And Michelle, we are excited to have you on. Reid is in this episode, but he is late for a meeting, so he skipped the intro and left it to the two of us. But you are now the Director of Digital Strategy over at Lincoln?
That's correct.
I didn't know if I would get that right, so I'm glad I did. Well, we were pumped to have you on as our first call-in guest. We are branching out and bringing folks in our network in, and you were the first one that came to mind. Because we've known you now for probably 6 or 7 years, somewhere in that time frame. And I remember from the first day we met you in Florida, we were just pumped by this firecracker that is Michelle, and how hard charging, go getting, and tenacious that you are, but yet friendly and all the like. So we thought of you immediately when we wanted to start bringing on outside guests. And the setup for this episode is that Reid, I don't know if I call him a fan, but he likes the idea of the James Lipton, the guy from AMC. I think it's AMC. He does Inside the Actor Studio, where he'll interview Bradley Cooper about his life. And that's the approach he wanted to take with you. And I feel like we did sort of that, right?
Yeah, I think we did it. We accomplished some things.
Okay. So
what I remember, things.
It's a long conversation. It's 2 hours. But what I remember is we talked about the fact that you got into apartment marketing 11 years ago, which knocked my socks off, that you started in student housing before bouncing to a couple different places. We met you when you were at Greystar as a
marketing specialist. Well, yeah, I think it was Greystar by the time you guys met me. I was there as a marketing specialist, marketing associate, whatever the title was.
You are a direct contact. And then you obviously moved up the chain there. And then most recently you've gone on to take on a larger strategic role at Lincoln, which we're super excited for you about. Yes. So we get into that journey, but then what else do we talk about? Let me just ask you.
We talked about ILSs and where they were, where they are, maybe what's coming. We talked about paid search and that kind of progression of, when that really started to be a thing. I know we talked about geofencing and then also fair housing, because Reid wanted to touch on that. And we also talked about SEO and what that means today. I think that was pretty much everything, along with some random lightning questions that you kindly threw at me that I failed.
There can be no fail with lightning round. I would say we also hit on, oh shoot. Oh man, I totally lost it. Oh well. We talked about other stuff that I'm sure is also interesting, but thank you for your rolling with it with our questions where we went totally off script.
You are very welcome. That was fun.
Well, if someone wants to hear what it's like to be a marketer in today's world and someone that's been with it since, as you said, before there were call tracking numbers.
Yes.
Yeah. To today, then this is the episode for you, and stay tuned in.
Awesome.
All right. Well, we were just talking, funny enough, I think it was on the last podcast. It was somebody internal, but we were curious how they got into first, I guess, what was it? Vacation rentals, how they got into that agency. And then we already know, because we were the ones that recruited them from there into multifamily. But the question in this is, how did you get into the industry? I feel like you're one of those vets that's still in the early stages, and hopefully you're not taking that the wrong way, but part of it's that you got this great energy and youthful face about you, but it's also because I got to meet you several years ago, just briefly at the time when we were at Ad Taxi. But you carry yourself, and I'm not blowing smoke, as a true vet. You really have acquired a lot of great knowledge, and I think have a lot of great thoughts. So take us back, in time, if you will, and let us know how did you get introduced to the multifamily industry?
Yeah. Well, thank you first off for that compliment. I will totally take that. So I've actually been in multifamily for 11 years now. So I actually started when I was in college. I needed a job, and my brother is actually a property manager in student housing. So he recommended that I give leasing a shot. So he said, I'm sure you can do it. At the time, I think I was working at Bath and Bodyworks. He's like, you can sell body products, you can lease an apartment. It's the same thing. So that's kind of how I got started. And my degree is actually in graphic design. So when I finished my degree, the company I was working for actually created a marketing position, and they needed 3 people. And so I was lucky enough to get the opportunity to take that position fresh out of college. So actually I started midway through my senior semester, which was kind of crazy. But it was a really, really awesome opportunity. So I got to do marketing for student housing in Gainesville, Florida. So that's how it started.
Go ahead.
I didn't even say anything, but I'm first of all blown away by 11 years because I thought Michelle was like, well, I don't know how this would sound, but I would have guessed like 7.
Yeah, I would have said the same thing. Again, it's a lot of it is her appearance, which, good for you. Not all of them have that effect. People are like, are you 65, Reid? But yeah, so student housing, I actually did not know that. We're going to do like intro, like for her more officially in the intro, right?
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to miss that and be like, who the hell are we talking to? So student housing, that's the part I didn't realize is that you cut your teeth with student housing. And was that with Greystar or was that with a different company?
No, so that was with the Collier companies. They're a small owner, operator. They're based in Gainesville, Florida. It's privately held and focused solely on student housing in Gainesville, Tampa, Tallahassee, and I think they've now branched out into the Athens market in Georgia. So pretty much just that Southeast student housing, larger markets.
So then catch us up to today, if you don't mind. Not that this is, like some sort of traditional interview, but yeah, how did you end up then shifting from there into multifamily, Greystar, and now you're at Lincoln? So if you want to give us the cliff notes on that, then we can probably jump right in.
So I actually wanted to move out of Gainesville because if you know anything about Gainesville, Florida, is very small town USA. Everything revolves around the college. And so once you graduate, you kind of feel sometimes like you don't belong, or at least I felt that way. So I moved to Orlando, Florida, and I actually worked on site in conventional with McKinley. They're a management owner based in the Midwest, and then worked with them for a little bit. Then I dabbled in real estate for a hot second, where I actually worked with Keller Williams. I did marketing for a real estate team. And then I actually got a position with Riverstone Residential, which, as you guys know, was purchased by Greystar. So I then went into the Greystar realm, and then just most recently joined the Lincoln team.
Awesome. And I think I already congratulated you, but I'll do it one more time. It sounds like a great opportunity, and it's early, but you want to talk us through just a little bit more about your current role with Lincoln and what has you excited about it?
Yeah, so I am the director of digital strategy. So very excited, new position, and really excited to bring consistency, good data, good reporting, just things like that to the Southeast region. So I'm focused just in the Southeast, just focusing on those properties and just really helping support the marketing team. And so working very closely with the marketing directors and their campaigns, working with different digital agencies, different advertising partners, things like that.
Cool. I have one other question, then I'll let David pop in here if he wants to, and then we can move to what I like to start with, which is past, present, future. But in your current role, one of the things that we've identified, and you helped us, I feel like, in multiple conversations, but just the gap between, or distance, we'll say, between the operators in particular. We're used to that happening with regionals, but sometimes owners, investors, and the marketing. So now in your current role with Lincoln, is that still, and it's not to mean, be critical, but is that still the case, or are you getting more opportunities to help bridge that gap with, the purse strings, if you will, the operations investors, the RPMs that may not be as familiar with digital marketing and digital strategy?
Yes and no. I think there will always be maybe some sort of, kind of gap there, just because of where people's knowledge lies and what their expertise is in. I'm mostly focused on kind of back end and higher level strategy. But of course, that doesn't mean that I won't, help, push the conversation forward when it comes to digital advertising and different strategies, how we track, how we manage, all of those things. So I guess, yes, it helps bridge the gap a little bit, but of course, I think there will always still be a slight gap, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I just, when we talk data now, we still see it as the biggest opportunity is to try and incorporate more data sets outside of just digital campaigns, because it's so important to two-factor for some of that operational data in order to come up with the best digital strategy. So, that just giving you a little bit as far as the spirit of that question. But before I ask her the question about past, present, future, do you want to jump in there?
That's exactly where my mind wants to go, but more, I think you're going to take this a different way, but I'm more curious, and it is past, present, future, but I guess I'll start on one end of it, which is, Michelle, like, what do you think? I guess I'm trying to do it in a different way than Reid may hit, but can you give us what you think a marketer was like their day-to-day position, let's say 5 years ago, even, or 3 years ago, versus like what it is today, what's expected of them, versus obviously what you think is going to be coming in 5 years. And you and I hit this on a previous call, like a little bit, so I can tee you up if you need, but I'll start there and see if you want to tee.
Yeah. So you might want to come in, but I guess I'll take a crack at it. So I would say, gosh, it seems like marketers do a lot, everything, wear so many very different hats that it's really hard to say like what was, what is, and then what's coming. It's really hard to kind of divide it into those buckets, if you will. I mean, gosh, I'm trying to think 5 years ago, different things that I worked on versus most recently things that I worked on. It's a lot of the same, but I would say, marketing has their hands in everything from not just, your advertising, where you're advertising, but what does it look like? What does your brand look like? What's your brand messaging? What does your signage look like? What does your collateral look like? How is that positioned? How is the resident experience at the property? So that's something that I think is probably relatively newer within the present, if you will, is really the focus on the resident experience. What does that tour look like from the very first time they encounter your on-site team and the leasing space? Like, what does that look like? How does that transition into when they become a resident? How do they feel? What do they think of your property? Are they going to want to tell their friends to live there? Like, all of that stuff, all of those questions and thoughts is something that marketing is very involved in from the very beginning now. We definitely put more focus on the resident experience, making sure that, resident events match your brand and they match your demographic, and that people want to attend and that people want to participate, because we understand that helps with, your retention. And so retention is another huge thing that's now in like the marketing realm that we start thinking about. Now we have advocacy is another thing that, 5 years ago, I don't think was a huge thought. I think Modern Message and what they've done with their platform has changed that a lot recently. But I think that's another huge thing that is in marketing's, bucket, if you will, that wasn't previously. And then, oh man. And then, and then you have to manage all of these moving pieces. It's a lot of project management, and you're doing it for multiple properties at the same time, and you have to keep things straight. And you're also always looking at the data and the numbers and saying, is this working? How can it be better? Are we delivering, on our promise? And are we making our clients happy? Are we keeping our residents happy? Is the on-site team happy? We don't want to make our own team members unhappy by rolling out a new tool that doesn't work. So, I think we even most recently, marketing's now started getting involved in some of the new technology that's coming into the space, even though it might not directly be marketing. We are kind of, taking a piece of that, and we're working with that. So whether it be like a self-touring technology or a scheduler or any, you name it, any new technology. I remember being at NAA years ago and talking to the parcel pending guys for an hour about parcel pending. That has nothing to do with marketing, but I wanted to know what the solution was because if a client ever asked, it was something that I had. So I think marketing does a lot. There's a lot of things that we have our hands in, and where that goes, I have no idea. I really don't. So I don't know if that answers the question, if that gets you where you're going, David.
Well, yeah, no, that's super helpful. I appreciate that you're not exactly sure where it's going. I think you have some concepts, but you're just not ready to articulate yet. I will say though, I like 5 years ago, there goes Lucy. Lucy's in office snoring today.
That wasn't a bad lunch from me. That's what I was warning you about, Michelle. Although she just got up as soon as you said that. So
of course I did. Well, she probably heard lunch, and that's what got her. I like 5 or 6 years ago when we first met, I feel like there was a lot more project management and expectations around like offline advertising. Certainly there was online advertising going on at the time, but it feels like, at least from my experience over the last 5 or 6 years, there's a lot more emphasis from the marketer on digital and less on the offline and brand management and stuff. And I don't know if that's because expectations are, you guys are the role of a marketer. I know you're in a different role now, but the role of a marketer, if that's grown, where it's like, great, you have the same resources, but you got to do more, which means expectations have changed, which means the people that are being hired in need to just be more on their game and more experienced to begin with. Or if some of that work has moved elsewhere.
I think, yeah. So I see what you're saying. So I think that back then it was that as an industry, we weren't all up to speed on really digital. I mean, if you want to talk about when I got into the industry 11 years ago and what type of advertising we had. And I mean, I can tell you, I remember when we did not have CRMs. We did not have a lead management system with tracking phone numbers or emails to populate. And it was always up to me to get that information when someone called on the phone. And if I forgot, I checked apartments.com because it was at the top of the list. So, I mean, it was one of those. Like, I remember back in that day to not having those systems. And, you had no idea who managed your listings. Like, when I worked on site, I was like, I don't know who does this. I have no idea. You didn't have syndication tools. And then also like paid search, paid advertising. I mean, I remember we didn't even have Facebook pages for our properties when I worked on site in student housing. Like, it was just becoming a thing when I was kind of moving more into the conventional realm. So I mean, that's 11 years ago. And so I think it really wasn't a part of the industry the way that it is today. And so therefore it wasn't required of the marketing team. Like you're saying, like there was other things, but that paid digital campaigns, social campaigns, things like that weren't a part of the mix because the industry just wasn't there yet. Now, over the last 5 years, that has grown significantly, right? So we see that those are more common. And I mean, everybody who's anybody knows you have to have a Facebook page. You have to have an Instagram page. You have to have a GMB listing. Like, these things. It's very rare when you find a property or a client that doesn't have a syndication tool or a CRM to track their leads. So I think it's becoming, those are definitely part of the day-to-day jobs of marketers now, but it's just because of the growth that the industry has seen over the last, handful of years. So I don't necessarily think like it's that something got shifted off. I think it's just that as we grow, we just keep adding more and we keep seeing what's out there.
Yeah. Quick aside, I don't think I told you, Reid, and I won't name the company, but we just took on a management company the other day whose Facebook page was like rentals and turkey company. I'll leave it at that. But
Turkey?
It's a property management company that does, of course, rentals, but also turkey.
Oh, okay.
I won't speculate.
So anyways, we got to correct that. But back to your thing, they don't have a very up-to-date or robust social presence.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, go ahead, Michelle.
No, I was going to say, I think it's not uncommon to see like that either. I think it's just, again, as the industry learns more and then new technologies are brought on, you start to see things differently. I remember when third-party social posting became a thing. And it was like, oh my gosh, there's a service that can do this for you. This is so cool. So, I mean, I remember when that started.
Wow. Well, I have one last thing, and then I'll pass it to Reid. I'm curious on the on how the role has changed. How much more involved is the marketer now on, I'll say, the pitch and retention on the business side, meaning the ownership group or the investment company, first, and has that changed, and is it changing?
So I think it depends company to company and what that looks like. But I do think marketing is a much bigger presence in the overall kind of business than it used to be, for sure. I think that our clients are much smarter as well. They're self-taught a lot of times. They come to the table asking very great questions, and they're really focused on marketing. They understand how important marketing is nowadays. And with all of the technology out there, you know, how do you pick? Where do you go? How much do you spend? That kind of thing. And so marketing, I think, is definitely more a part of that puzzle, a bigger piece of that puzzle than it used to be. Is that, what else did you ask? Sorry.
Well, just if it was changing. I didn't know if you had told me the other day that you thought that they basically they were being more interested than they used to be because owners, they were basically reading TechCrunch or whatever, and there's all these all this big investment that's going into marketing tech and whatnot, and so that then that pressure rolls down to the marketer, where it's like, now you have to be abreast of this, and why the heck aren't we doing personalized website design or whatever?
Exactly. No, it's 100% that. They're definitely more involved, and our clients bring things to the table all the time that they've read about. And that, like I said, it's a TechCrunch or some other new technology blog out there that they've read, and they say, this is interesting. So they bring it to the table, and it's, you know, up to the marketer to either know about it or to be able to figure it out really quickly, or have a vendor partner or someone, a trusted advisor to lean on to help with additional information for that. But definitely there are a lot more questions than there used to be. And the types of questions I think are more sophisticated, if you will. It's not just like surface level anymore. Like, there are some really tough questions that we get asked where it's like, you know what? Yeah, that's a really good point. So it's very interesting, but I think it'll continue to grow. I don't know how much more, but I think it'll grow probably a little bit more in terms of the role that marketing takes in all of that, because again, there's just so much new technology that comes out, and it's all this, beautiful, delicate ecosystem and the way that it all plays with each other. And so marketing's not going away. The role that we play isn't going away. So.
Yeah, it's just evolving from my perspective. And what you just mentioned, hit me big parallel with WebMD. I was in pharmaceuticals for a few years, and they were constantly, I guess, or we would end up talking about that. It's like, and some of them would roll their eyes, and others were like, it's actually been great, because patients come in are more informed, and so they are asking better questions. And then other doctors are like, it's the worst thing that ever happened, because now we have a bunch of hypochondriacs that come in here and are constantly asking us about, disease states that aren't even relevant. So I'm sure on some level it's similar for you, where you get some great questions, and then somebody reads a TechCrunch blog and it's like, that could have done without that one. Last question on this. It's still, I guess, past, present, future, kind of on this vein. I think we're hitting this pretty well. But if you were hiring for your role, maybe that you vacated, or somewhere in the middle of those 11 years, is it fair then to assume that not just the job description, which would therefore be the expectation, but that people coming into the marketing multifamily like industry, that they will have a pretty strong background instead of kind of learn as you go? Like, you guys are actively recruiting now for digital experts, or is that a little bit too strong? Like, since you have to still account for signage and events and branding and all these other things you described, I'm just wondering, like, as far as prioritizing in looking for talent, how important is it for you guys to find folks that have digital expertise?
It's a great question. Again, I think it differs from company to company and what you really want to see, but I would say it may be just a bit too strong. I don't think it needs to be someone with this expert knowledge within digital. I have seen great marketers come from actual on-site employees where they used to be leasing. I myself came from on-site. So I think the industry is, and I've seen great marketers come from other industries into multifamily, and there's always a learning curve because multifamily is very different. And it is unique, and it is, you're dealing with something that's a bit product, but also a bit service. And it's someone's home, which is very different than, selling a product or offering a mobile detailing, right? Like it's somewhere in between, but it's also something that's very, very special to people. So there's a learning curve with multifamily, the industry itself. So I don't think there's a need to say we need a digital expert. Like, I don't need a Silicon Valley digital expert, because the chances of them having any grasp on multifamily is going to be very low. So it's a very delicate balance and blend, if you will, of those different traits, and what can you teach versus what is just an innate quality that someone has. And I think a lot of this stuff, a lot of the things that I've learned over the years are really self-education. I take it on my own time to read different blogs and articles and research different things and watch videos. And all of that stuff, and it changes so regularly that you have to continue to learn and to look for it and seek it out, because I could think I know everything today and tomorrow it's completely different. It happens literally probably weekly for me. So I don't think you need an expert. My personal opinion, you need a delicate balance somewhere in between.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And then eventually, you become director of digital strategy at Lincoln. So you start with not a lot of knowledge, then you really jump into it, and then you own it, and then you get tapped. So that's awesome. I know that isn't going to be a lot of other people's paths, but I'm excited for you that you've taken to it so much. And I think it's obviously really benefited companies you've worked for. And I was about to say blah, blah, blah. I get made fun of for that. They say I'm Dracula from Transylvania because I often won't finish a sentence if I'm getting bored of myself, and I'll just say blah, blah, blah.
I feel like did Miranda hit you on it again recently?
Yeah, because I thought I had somewhat kicked it, and then she brought it up, and it made me really insecure about it again. And I noticed I was doing it more recently.
I'm cool with it. I'm because that's why I interrupt you sometimes. Meaning when we're personally talking, not on the podcast, I'll just be like, "I'll blah 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 for you."
Yeah. Let me just finish that for you. Blah blah blah. All right. So if we're good, I think like I said, we gotta keep going here so we can get to some of this other fun stuff. And unless you object, one of the favorite and least favorite topics, I think, for a lot of people in the industry is the ILS networks. So curious if you want to just give us general thoughts about, I guess, their value, and it still could play into this whole past, present, future. Obviously, they dominated the advertising spend, at least from everything we've ever heard, when they were first in the books, and then they became the online solution. And now there's a lot more diversification, and hence, this role that you have wouldn't probably be there if everybody was just still spending money on the ILSs. That being said, David and I often do advocate, I guess, or proponents of some ILS representation. It's just being more thoughtful about it, more strategic. So with that kind of short preamble, what are your thoughts around the ILS networks these days?
Yeah. So again, taking it back to the past, present, future kind of thing. I remember when rent.com was separate, Apartment Guide was separate, apartments.com, Apartment Finder, and For Rent were all separate. I remember Zillow before it had Trulia and HotPads, I think. Gosh, who else? Lovely was out there as like a startup before they got bought by what is RentPath. I remember when Apartment List first got their start. So I remember I've seen a lot of transition within the ILSs over the last 11 years, I guess. And a lot of changes. I think that the ILSs definitely hold value. I actually was thinking about this the other day. I would compare an ILS to like an MLS, in my opinion. So imagine you need to find an apartment and you want just one place to look to find like a slew of options. Where else are you going to get that? It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in a great way, except for in the ILSs. I think the transition of what the ILSs have done over the years, and with CoStar buying apartments.com and then purchasing Apartment Finder and For Rent, and building that kind of network. And then also what, RentPath has done with, rent.com and Apartment Guide, Lovely, and building that thing. And now we got the news, a month or so ago that CoStar was purchasing RentPath. So it's crazy to see all of the changes and the shifts. I think though, by kind of condensing over the years, I think that the value proposition for the marketer has been even better, because I was like, oh, you mean that I could get advertised on 2 sites for the same price or just a little bit more? That's easy. And I think that happened at the same time that digital came in to play. And I think it allowed those budgets to shift, because did ILSs control, majority of that marketing, spend? Absolutely. I think it was the only option. There wasn't a digital advertising, paid search, display, social advertising was not really part of the mix. So now that we have these kind of big networks and you can get, listed on 4 different websites, for a reasonable rate, it's a lot easier to squeeze into your marketing mix, along with, still doing, if you want to do your paid search or your paid social ads, things like that. So, it's very interesting to see how they've gone over time, and I'm intrigued by the purchase, and what that means. I don't know what that's going to look like. I've heard different people say it's almost like it's a monopoly, but it's not, because there's still plenty of other ILSs out there. There's other networks that you can advertise on. So it's just going to be really interesting to see how it all plays out. I'm intrigued by it. I know that with each acquisition that CoStar had in the past, it took them roughly about a year to kind of bring the company into the fold. But I'm intrigued by it. But I think the value in the ILSs still exists, because again, where else are you going to find a good listing of just, I need 5 apartments that fit my needs, that have availability. It's like if Kayak or Expedia or Priceline didn't exist. Like, how would you book a hotel? You Google and find like the hotel's local website. It'd probably be a little bit more time consuming. So I think there's value there. I think it's absolutely needed in our industry. You can't get away from that. But I do remember when it was the lion's share of, the mix, but it's definitely changed.
Yeah. Well, I know for a fact this one could take us to the end,
The ILS.
Yeah, I'm going to try and hold off. But you did mention, I was going to go there, like, do you think consolidation's been good for the industry or bad? And most people now, I believe, not to speak for the industry, but are a little anxious about the rent path because that does, even though I agree with you, there's definitely still other options, does start to feel like a monopoly is forming, which I think most people don't see as value or as good because they potentially lose some options. So that was my, I guess one observation. And even looking further back is that with consolidation, there is theoretically less opportunity to optimize like your campaigns. But what we've always heard is that option actually never existed because they're so firm with their contracts, which, we have just said over and over is unfortunate. But then we'll hear mixed things depending on, portfolio size, like I'll say a Greystar or Lincoln versus some of the smaller guys on what they can and can't do if they're seeing that their campaigns aren't really performing up to snuff, with their whatever package they have, that they actually have the flexibility to move it elsewhere, but typically still within the network. So you already kind of hit on that. But if you don't mind, just, I guess, putting a finer point on your perception on, the value of consolidation versus, what might be lost.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And I know it's been a lot of the talk, but to me, over the years, the consolidation made it just easier to, pick, if you will, and to really make that marketing mix, because when you went from 6 options to 3, it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier. And it's also one of those things where you can say, well, even if, let's say that there's a network out there that has 4 websites, even if 2 of those websites aren't great websites or they don't deliver a ton of traffic, it's still good exposure on the internet, right? It helps for that SEO kind of value. It just helps with your people getting eyes on you. So it's an easier thing to say, yeah, I'm going to advertise on this network that has 4, places, exposures, 4 opportunities for someone to find my property versus maybe 1. And then I also think that, to your point, with the purchase, yes, does it look like a monopoly? And I mean, yes, and what does that mean? Does that change packages when you control, a lot of it? Does that mean that you're going to raise rates? Does that mean that the contracts are going to be harder to negotiate? I mean, I have no earthly idea, but I can definitely see why that's a concern. I don't truthfully know how to feel about it just yet. I'm excited and intrigued by it, but I don't know if it's going to be a good thing or a bad thing. I couldn't tell you what my real outlook is on that because I just really haven't formulated that opinion. I'm more just like, I think I'm really still in shock by it because I think we all secretly thought it was going to happen, but then at the same time we were like, no, there's no way. And so when the news broke, it was like, is this real? Is this really happening? So yeah, I think to a certain extent, consolidation does help. And it does make things a little bit easier when you're trying to look at your overall spends and just kind of weigh out your exposure versus your cost and things like that. And then also I think, when it comes to consolidation, there's a lot of streamlined things that happen. So it seems like every time that I use CoStar as the example because they're the ones that have been doing it, right? So when they purchased apartments.com, they completely revamped that website. Like they turned that website on its head. And I went from not really loving the apartments.com website to like absolutely adoring it. I really loved it. And the interface. And then they did the same thing with Finder and they did the same thing with For Rent. And then every time that they've done that, they've also added more features and, kind of different pieces to it. And so it seems like they're continuing to try to better optimize. And so, maybe that's the benefit of the consolidation. I don't know. I don't know if they would have done that anyways. But it seems like it always just happens with the consolidation with them, like buying something. It's like, oh, there's a new website and there's this new feature. So I think it's interesting, the newest one, but I would say overall, I personally liked it. But yeah.
Cool. Like I said, I have a bunch more, but one key one, but I want to make sure you get a couple in here on the
Mine aren't I've got my notes of what I'm going to hit her with, but they're kind of more like lightning round.
Specific to ILS or
no. Outside of that.
Oh, okay. Well, if I can, I'll just again, I have 10 more questions about the ILS, but last question is, what are your thoughts? You mentioned when you remember when Apartment List started, but I'll just say these performance-based models. So Zillow is pretty much a pay per lead or pay per lease, and Apartment List obviously is, and they seem to have done extremely well by it. We've heard, this is just teeing you up, Michelle, but we've definitely heard about lead fatigue or poor quality being one of the gripes. But then we've also heard from a lot of people, we appreciate that because we deal with some bad leads too when it comes to some of these fixed players, even, CoStar. So performance-based has been great. So yeah, what are your thoughts when it comes to kind of that separation between, fixed packages and performance-based models?
So I think you can find good and bad with everything, right? So I personally like the performance-based models. I do understand what you're saying when you say lead fatigue, that unqualified leads. I have seen, even when it comes to attribution, sometimes it could be a little bit maybe skewed, or you're not sure if it's 100% accurate, things like that. So there's always going to be those things, but I like it because it seems to be an easy yes. So meaning you don't pay until you get a lease. So you don't pay until someone moves in. And that is better, than, let's say, if you're talking about a set package where you're not guaranteed anything. You're paying and you're hoping that your target demographic is on that network and that they're going to see you and that they're going to request information. But then also there's this other thing that I think we'll probably end up talking about, but multi-source attribution. So we can't leave that out of the mix just because, it's so hard, and you have to know that a prospect is going to look at you on 5 different websites. It's not just going to be one. So, sometimes maybe those set package players, maybe they don't get the love because they weren't the final say so of where that person submitted their lead, right? So it could be, that's a whole other ball game, a whole other can of worms that I'm sure, I don't know if we'll open. But I think the performance models good. I remember Rent.com used to be pay per lease back in the day. I remember you would get an invoice with a resident's name and you had to verify it and check it off and put it in your system and pay it. So I remember running disputes. So yeah, that was way back before they were bought by RentPath. And the way that actually Rent.com's model was back in the day was they advertised to their prospects that if they found their apartment on Rent.com, they submitted their guest card through Rent.com, and then they leased, they could go back to Rent.com and say, check, I leased, and Rent.com would send them a gift card. So there was an incentive for the prospect to report it, that yes, I did in fact lease at this place, and then that's what would trigger the invoice that Rent.com would send to the property. So, that was way back in the day. And so I think, Apartment List or Zillow or Zumper, or, I think Lovely tried to do it originally. I think that's what their model was back in the day when they first started out before they were bought. But I think that those services, I think they make sense. Not everywhere. And of course you're always going to have the good with the bad, but not everywhere. But yeah, sometimes it's a perfect option.
Well, then you have the tweeners, which in a way, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if Zillow offers both. I can't remember pay-per-lease and pay-per-lead, but Zumper is not offering pay-per-lease, but they offer a super cheap pay-per-lead. And it surprised me because we typically, I'll just say, don't hear the best things about lead quality there, how they've survived, because nobody wants to just inundate their leasing teams with a bunch of bad leads. And I'd rather, if I'm going to go performance-based, actually pay for a lease, not just a generic lead. But let's just leave that as commentary, I guess, or narrative. I want David to be able to get to some of his lightning round stuff. We got a bunch of other topics here, so we will move on if everybody's cool with that from the ILSs.
Yeah.
All right. So have at it, man.
Oh, you're my lightning round already?
Well, exactly how we're going to work, like position that is that.
Well,
like
they're just random
minutes?
questions.
Like,
They don't.
okay. All right.
So maybe I'll do it anyways because maybe it'll tie to the ILS. But I don't think we've told you this story, Michelle. But we like to ask our engineers what their greatest mistake has been. So their greatest flub, and so just to soften your blow, and also that you feel safe, the safe spot of just the three of us, right?
Yeah.
On what you're gonna reveal here, but we have an engineer that had shut off the internet to Mexico. Like he, this is my favorite one, but he, I won't name names, but he was working for a telecom company, the largest one in Mexico. He hit a wrong button and Mexico had no more internet. So anyways, see if you can top that. What's your greatest flub?
And now he's working on Fiona.
Yeah, now he's working on Fiona and he is senior.
The best, baby.
Oh man. Well, I definitely don't think I could top that, and I don't want to. I don't know what oh gosh. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I've definitely made some mistakes, but I cannot think about my greatest flub. Oh my gosh. I'm really drawing a blank. You might want to circle back. I honestly
I feel like we need to go like check some of your referrals, your prior managers, and say like we need some dirt,
some type of dirt on you.
No, it's
David makes those hard right turns.
like, okay, so I'll give you an example. So we have, you guys know this, we use like either Entrata or Rent Cafe or RealPage, like websites. And sometimes we're given the access to control like the websites. And I am sure back in the day that I made a couple mistakes on the websites, but I fixed them really quickly because I was checking them like as I was adjusting. I changed a template once and it did not look good, but it was up for maybe 2 seconds before I took it back down and reverted. But I honestly can't think of, I really can't think of anything.
Well, there's been other marketers that I won't name that we haven't had on the podcast yet, but they'll use like the wrong name. They'll use the wrong website. They'll send us the wrong property like to do work on or whatever. In fact, there's a great, there's this other podcast that both Ben and I really like. It's called Darknet Diaries. And it's all about like hackers online. And there is a certain type of company you can hire to do a like infiltration of your company to just show like, hey, our security's good. And what I love is their mistake on this one episode was they were hired by a bank to break into the bank and steal the banking information. And they were told the wrong bank. So and it was in a foreign country. So they were in like, I don't know, Czechoslovakia, sent to Americans, break into the wrong bank. Eventually you try to go far enough to get caught. So you can say like, here's where you guys finally fell down. So they finally get caught, if you will, but then they take their like get out of jail card or what out to say like, hey, I was hired by the chief security officer. And they're like, no, that's the wrong bank.
Man.
And I was like, well, now you are in a foreign country. You talk about locked up abroad.
Oh my God.
So anyways,
yeah, like gosh, I'm pretty sure everybody's messed up a name. Or like, maybe messed up a budget or something like that, I'm sure. Gosh, those...
breaking into the wrong bank and turning off the internet in Mexico.
Exactly. I have nothing even close to that level. So I'm sure I've used the wrong name in emails. I'm sure I
do that on every call.
I've actually many times, I've responded to the email before I've actually read the person's full email. So like I will just get real trigger happy and I'll just start responding after reading like 2 lines, and then I'll send, and then I read the rest of their email and realized that the questions I just sent, they were already answered and they already They already gave me all the information. So I've done that a couple times, I'm sure. But yeah, I can't anything compared to Mexico's no internet or robbing the wrong bank. So
yeah. Well, take bigger risks, Michelle. That's all I can say.
Apparently I need to get into hacking banks. So
Well, your current role, you probably have more opportunities for bigger screw-ups. The bigger the responsibility, the bigger the screw-ups.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's come back, and then we'll periodically let David hit you with these left field questions.
I love left field. I love them.
Yeah, totally. Keep you on your toes. You mentioned earlier, and I think everybody, I guess, understands or appreciates this now, that the biggest disruption to hit multifamily marketing was paid search, meaning that ILS did have, the bulk share, and that really, and we've talked many times about it being a gateway into experimentation with other digital platforms and strategy. But if you reflect back to when you really recognize that, that paid search was legitimately disrupting the industry. And then just, I guess general thoughts about paid search today. Is it as much a staple in your opinion as ILSs have become? And where do you see its strengths? Where do you still see some challenges with paid search?
Yeah. So I was just thinking back about when I first remember interacting with paid search. So when I was in student housing, in that very first marketing position I had, I do remember my marketing director toying around with it. He got Google AdWords certified on his own and came in one day and said, I'm going to run some campaigns. And I was like, what do you mean? What is this? What is this magic that you're talking about? And he walked me through Google Analytics, and he showed me how he set up the campaigns. And I was really impressed, shocked, surprised, kind of all of it. But it kind of came and went for me. I didn't have any control on those. I didn't oversee anything. So it wasn't anything I thought about. And then when I went back into conventional, I remember with Riverstone back in the day, one of my regional managers coming to me and saying, we need that paperclip. And I was like, your paperclip? And they're like, yeah, we need paperclip. And I was like, what is that? So I realized they were meaning pay per click, and that I think they were referring to Google Ads, Google AdWords. And so I was like, oh, okay. And then I was like, do we have a person that does that? I don't even know. So I kind of got reintroduced to it. And at first it was, only on a couple properties, only on your lease ups, only on the places that had the bigger budgets. And even then I remember the budgets being very small. I remember sometimes a monthly budget was like $500, which now when I look back, I'm like, how did that even make a difference? So it's very interesting to see how it's kind of come over the years. I would say, as I've used it more, and as I've understood the data and how we can track it and what metrics to look at and what, the kind of benchmarks are for the industry or the, kind of averages that we see, as I've, learned those things over the years, I love paid search. I do think it's a big part of the marketing mix these days, not for every property, but for a good majority of them, I would say. I think you still have some smaller budget properties out there that really can't afford to run multiple things. They just don't have the budget, and they might not need it either. I mean, we have a lot of properties that will sit at 98% occupied, and they don't really have to do anything. They don't have to advertise. I remember when when I was in Florida, actually, a client told me that he wanted to cut the entire advertising budget. And I said, what do you mean? He said, I want no ILSs and no paid search, no paid social, none of that. Get rid of all of it. And I was really scared. I was very nervous about it. I could not believe it. I convinced them to hang on to the pay per lease apartment list in Zillow, because I was like, look, you won't pay unless you get a lease. So it's totally worth it. And he's like, okay, fine. But everything else, get rid of it. And then the property performed. And that was actually in the middle of a lease up. And so I was really, really shocked. So I think it's perfectly possible for a property to survive and perform and do well without a lot of advertising. And I think that some communities can get away without paid search, and then some, I think it's definitely part of the mix, and it should kind of always be part of the mix. And then the ancillary, add-ons, as you mentioned, Reid, you've started to explore. There's all kinds of different advertising that, we do nowadays that I never touched back in the day. It was really just paid search. And then all of a sudden, it's like, oh, well, now we're going to do display, and we're going to do geofencing, and we're going to do paid social ads, and we're going to do Spotify, and, whatever the other ways, and Snapchat ads for a hot second. So, I think that opened the door to playing around with all these other different types of advertising avenues. So,
yeah,
I have to ask, how do you get settled with that? Meaning the example in the Florida property where you pulled back advertising. So how do you have that example, but then still, how are you settled with it? And I'll just expand. We have, so Digible has one small investor, Steve Donahue, and he at one point had told us, shoot, what property was he was in California?
It was the whole West Coast pretty much for him.
Yeah, basically. He had, I forget how many properties underneath him at the time, but he was like, he pulled all ILSs at the time as an experiment for an entire year. And he was like, and it worked. Like it was fine. And it's funny because like one small investor, meaning he's our only investor in Digible, and yet he believes in investing in Digible for marketing. So I still haven't gotten a clear answer from him on that. How does he settle with that if he did this experiment? It worked.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the way that we try to coach people through that want to take that approach or experiment with that is, it's not to say that a property can't perform without advertising, but if you approach it the correct way with advertising, you should be in a better position to raise rent or improve close ratios. Like there's other, let's just say, ancillary KPIs that would prove that's a good strategy, a smart strategy. And I agree wholeheartedly, Michelle, and I know David does too. Like we don't think that every property needs advertising, but if there's an argument in that scenario where it's like, it is performing, we don't need the ILSs, we don't need paid search, then I think it is like, okay, well, if we were to get you more leads, more qualified leads, could we potentially like bring in a more valuable resident that either is going to stay there longer or be willing to pay more? Therefore, you can end up with more NOI if you like buy into that concept. And it doesn't always play out, but that's how I'm settled with it. I guess if I'm seeing something that's kind of leasing itself, it's like, well, we should be pivoting a little bit more towards NOI now if this thing's in a great position, like independently of advertising.
Yeah, I mean, I would love the idea that you don't need advertising, because I don't like, basically, like what does Digible or any of the folks help you do? For the most part, for the paid media, we're helping Google get rich or Facebook get rich. And do they need any more cash to go like lock down our privacy or whatever, or open up or not make us private citizens? They don't need any more resources. So I would love the fact to know that. In fact, I told Reid this the other day, but look, as much as we track conversions and success and all that, during COVID, in one stretch, we had 3 different properties that called us in 2 days that turned on like that week, and they let us know 2 days after the campaigns turned on. They're like, "Oh my gosh, what did you guys do? It's amazing the traffic we're getting now." And I like had to sit down. I was like, "What? Your advertising worked?" I don't huh? I mean, you like to think it does, but I just that they could feel it on site, like the true wave hit them. I don't know. Yeah.
We'll be editing that out.
No.
The president of Digible is like, what? Advertising works?
Yeah. So I'm asking Michelle how she settles with it since she's done this experiment.
So I didn't do that experiment willingly. That was a forced decision, but it's so okay. So every property is its own beast. It's its own thing. So it's like to say that, David, you and Reid are the same person and that you should wear the same hats. You're not. You should not wear the same hats. You have different personalities. You have different, approaches to things. You're not the same. So every property is very different. And you can't just say, well, it worked for this one, so you should just do it on these. And even in your example of the investor that pulled from the entire West Coast, I mean, what properties? Where are they located? what, cities, what thoroughfares. I mean, I was thinking about this the other day. When you have a property that is on a main street in a town where people are driving by left and right, do you need as much exposure? Probably not, because you have great visibility. And if you're finding that most of your people are coming from local anyways, then maybe that's not the thing. But what if you're in an area that's getting ready to surge? So for example, I remember when I was moving to Charlotte, I moved to Charlotte three years ago now. And I thought Charlotte was big, but I didn't realize that there was so much more coming. And it's a very transient town where people move in and move out for work. And so we saw a lot of people moving from New Jersey and New York, the Northeast. And it was like, well, how do you target those people up there that are searching up there? So I think it really depends. I mean, I remember when, was this last year? I think last year Honeywell announced that they were moving their headquarters to Charlotte or to just across the border to South Carolina. And it was like, how do we target Honeywell? I was like, well, their current headquarters is in New Jersey. Let's work there. Let's figure that out. So I think it depends on the need of the community and everything that the community has going for it. And Reid, to your point, if you are at 98% and you really don't need anything, can you capture, better, let's say, instead of turning apartments every year, could you get away with turning apartments every 3 years? Because the demographic that you're targeting with your advertising is going to stay a little bit longer. Wouldn't you rather do that? You would. Even if you don't raise rents, you're still saving money on the turn. So it's all a big variable. So nothing's one size fits all. That's how I settle with it. That's how I say, like, it works for some, it doesn't work for others. And that's why it's so important to look at your advertising mix and really analyze what's happening and make sure that you're making the right decisions for spending the money in the right areas. And that you're not just either throwing it at the wall and saying, I'm putting all of the money, all of the eggs into all of the baskets. Or I'm saying, no baskets, no eggs, no nothing. It shouldn't be, it's not one size fits all.
Right. There's the simplicity of things, but then there's every property's a snowflake, Reid.
Yeah.
Every property's a snowflake. Don't tell anyone different.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is a supply and demand game in this industry, very much no different than the airline industry. So to me, the more demand and quality demand that you can build up, the better off your property is going to be. So it's one thing to say this thing can lease up by itself or stay stabilized by itself, but it's another to say, is it reaching its full potential, from an NOI standpoint? And even in that example of you're on a main street, everybody's driving by, it's like, so you'll always be at 98% and you don't have to think, quote unquote, about marketing too much, or you can cut your spend there. But what if you were actually building on that and throwing gasoline on that, where it was like everybody's trying to get into that? Then either to, like we just said, Michelle, you potentially could work longer agreements or focus on tenants or residents that would stay longer. But I actually would be more inclined to say we are in a super hot spot. I do want to keep advertising and marketing so that I can keep raising my rent. And that's not me trying to be greedy or anything like that. I'm just putting myself in the shoes of the asset manager. And we've had more and more of these conversations. And I think you've done a nice job, especially with Prometheus. I don't mind hiding that or not hiding that name, but just in connecting that point to the asset manager. Because they, in that case, and maybe I shouldn't say too much more here, but they were working on really lean budgets. And, we were trying to get at that equation. And we did a little bit in the webinar, Michelle, if you caught any of those, but just what it would mean in this climate to keep your spend the same versus pull it back versus increase it. And this isn't totally I guess, running parallel with this conversation, but I know you get where we're coming from, and I don't want to, just belabor the point. So let's do another left field lightning round. This is, I think, a good rhythm. Is I'll come with these classic questions that allow you to just expound, and pontificate, Michelle, and then David will ask you what your spirit animal is.
Yeah, I'm going to give you an easier one this time, and then I'll give you a harder one next time. But Reid asks this almost in every interview, meaning employee interview, but pet peeves. So I want to hear pet peeves of either as a marketing manager working with different vendors. And not to gripe, again, it's a peeve. It's not a bitch session, right? So what is a pet peeve in that way, or I don't know, however you want to take it, even working internally, I guess.
Goodness gracious. I thought you were just going to say a pet peeve, and I was going to say where my husband leaves his shoes like all over the house. Like that's a pet peeve.
Good. That's good.
Let's see. Either internal or working with a vendor. So I think it's not necessarily, I mean, yeah, I guess it's kind of a pet peeve is if we have an idea or we want to try something, or we have a client that says, I want to try this. If we ever, like, I hate either saying or being told no. I hate doing that. I hate shutting the door on the ideas. So it's always like, okay, I don't know how we can do that, but like, let's try to figure it out. An example that exists in my mind is I did Waze advertising once. And it wasn't something that a digital agency that I partnered with at the time wasn't able to offer me. And so I was like, it can't be this difficult. I just need to a yes here. So I went on Waze and I did it myself. And I set up the ads myself and I ran it for a month and I tested it and I said, here's your results. This is what I'm seeing. But I don't love when, we have to say no to things or when we get told no on things like that. That's just, I'm a positive, optimistic person. So I always want to say yes. And this is going to be great and it's going to be awesome. So I think that's one of the hardest ones. And then I'd say, I think that's probably it. I mean, it kind of all revolves around that in some way, shape, or form. In terms of like, let's say you bring up a new idea for something and someone just goes, no. Like, okay, thanks. I guess I'll try again. So things like that.
Yeah, that irritates the crap out of me too. So we park our cars in the same garage, Michelle. All right,
so the opportunities just fly.
Yeah, totally, absolutely. Power of free thought, right? So a lot of discussion is being had right now around data, which you touched on just briefly earlier, as far as kind of how the industry is transforming when you're helping set the past, present, future. So I'm going to connect this. There's a lot of different places we could go with data, but I will connect it to fair housing and ask you also, I'm going to group geofencing in this. So geofencing was shiny object, right? I feel like Lease Labs almost made their business on that, along with websites, and you don't hear about it as much. And we already know some of the bigger companies and even some of the smaller ones are afraid to touch it just because of the anxiety right now around fair housing laws and targeting when it comes to digital marketing. So why don't we jump into this one, and maybe you can start with high level thoughts about fair housing, and then if you don't mind hitting a little bit on geofencing, because I'm just trying to get categorically at some of the key channels that we've seen in the industry. And this one, I don't want to say is on its way out, but don't you think it's fair to say that it's lost its luster in the last couple of years?
I think it's a lot of the larger companies have hit it and experimented. At least in the conversations I have with new management companies, it's the smaller companies or those that are kind of behind the times that are just now getting hit with the Jinko jeans style. Do you get the reference?
I did, and I loved it.
Thank you, Michelle.
Jeans.
Back in
the thing. Oh my gosh, Reid.
I'm 65.
Well, I'm apparently 17, so no.
Yeah. Well, they were basically back in the 90s, and they hit, as fashion does, it hits the coast first, but it made it to Texas in 98, 99.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
and
late 90s, early 2000s, Jinko jeans were the thing.
Texas.
Yeah. Well, in 98, you just graduated?
Yeah. No. I graduated in 94. Are you talking about from college or from high school?
Well, high school, but you would think it would make it to college at some point too. So you were in one of your colleges at the time.
I was roaming the earth when I was in college. I was not paying attention to Jingo jeans or whatever the hell you just said.
Yeah, well, here's the deal. They were basically the point of Jinko jeans is the bigger the leg, the better, meaning like the opening of the leg. And so they measured the jeans not by waist size, but it was by leg opening. See, Michelle's like giving. So I had friends that were like, they had 30-inch leg openings for each leg. And then I had one friend that had a 65-inch leg opening. It's like a dress walking down the hall. And anyways, that came in for 2-3 years, and then it left.
It sounds like a horrible, like bell bottoms, like trying to make a comeback. Like,
yeah, except it had like kind of like a goth, not a goth style. I don't even know. It's like a Spencer's.
It was
style.
like a skater goth, like the really large pockets, and then they were really low, and then they typically like people would have chains that would either like go to like a chain wallet. Yeah.
Well, you had to have a chain wallet because you'd lose your wallet
otherwise because the pockets were literally this wide. Oh gosh, it's so funny. My husband and I talk about Jinko jeans every once in a while because he was one of those. He was one of those kids. So I find that reference very funny, and I appreciate it a lot. Okay, so Reid, to your question, I'll go ahead and kind of answer. You said fair housing. So fair housing is one of those topics, right? It's like, I think do I know why fair housing exists? And do I totally believe in it? 100 million %. Totally needed. I remember that was the very first training. Fun fact, I was hired in multifamily on my birthday. And that was the very first training I took when I walked in that day. It was 9 a.m. and I am a college student and I had not had my coffee. And I'm sitting there listening to fair housing training. So it was very interesting. But then, of course, you're required to take it every single year. So I've taken fair housing training a ton, and I totally get why. I love it. I understand it. It's great. It does make things more challenging, when you start talking about marketing, but it's warranted. I think in the most recent years, because of the ability to see why you're receiving an ad and how you are targeted, I think has really kind of increased the maybe the troubles, if you will, for some companies with fair housing. So with geofencing, I get it because of the desperate impact and what that can cause and how that can affect things. And then I think, there's a federal level, there's a state level, there's a county level, city level. And so there's so many different layers and levels to fair housing. And to make sure you're compliant there's so many different things that, buckets that you could be hitting depending upon where your property is located. So it can be really difficult. So I think some people just kind of shy away from it entirely because they're like, it's just not worth, it's just not worth it. So that being said, I think geofencing, when it first came out, was kind of before we started seeing all of these fair housing issues within, multifamily marketing kind of realm. And it was a hot new technology. And people, again, I think this is, what we were talking about earlier. Multifamily as an industry was a little bit behind some of the other major industries that use this type of advertising. And so it was so shocking when we heard about it. I remember, I think David explained it to me one of the first times actually. And I remember being like, I'm sorry, you can draw a radius around a thing. I can tell you where I want to. So it was very intriguing. So I think that's why it kind of took multifamily by storm. It was the hot new technology and it seemed like it was going to solve all of our problems. I think what over time, the decline has been a little bit fair housing, right? But also I think people wanted to see leases. They wanted to see that return on investment. And as you know, it's very impossible to really be able to establish that. So because it is a higher funnel tactic, because oftentimes people might click on it and then walk away and then come back to your website or an ILS. It's that multi-source, attribution thing that we could bring up again if we wanted to. So I think that's really why people probably stopped using it, is that they didn't see the return on investment. So I think it has a lot to do with that. It's the same thing with display advertising, and the same thing with even sometimes social. I know there's Facebook has lead gen ads, right? But even before those existed, I remember thinking like, there's no way to tell. So when you would say a client, I would like this much money. And then after a month, they'd say, well, how many leases did you get me? And it's like, they all went back to our property website. So, I don't know. Yeah. So it's really, really hard. So I think that's part of the reason too.
Well, I'm just one follow-up on fair housing. How much is it left up to interpretation when you mention the city, the county, the state, versus like federal, from, I guess, marketer to marketer, like, and right now, maybe it's too early to ask this related to Lincoln, versus there isn't no room for interpretation, like right now with at least some of the larger companies, that there is hard policies. There's not kind of this discretion like that, we're going to run geofencing on this versus not on that. Because it seems like with some of the, lawsuits, legislation, that there is, committees forming or widespread like edicts coming down, like top down, like this is how we're going to handle this. So I just didn't know, because as David and I have been researching and investigating more and more, because, we know how important it is to the industry. It is incredible how much gray, and it seems like there's still a lot left to up for interpretation. So I didn't know, from your chair, be it with Lincoln or obviously just having left Greystar, what kind of, I guess, authority or autonomy are marketers, operators having versus it's just top down. This is the way it's going to be. This is the way we're going to handle it.
That's a really tough question, but I'm going to say it's pretty much just top down. So I think there have been some of those sweeping, for example, like geofencing was a thing that was just like, nope, no more kind of thing. And I think that was done because there are so many different levels that to try to manage and double check all of it would be, that would be like 100 bajillion full-time jobs. It's not, when you think about, let's say that a marketing manager oversees, we'll just say 30 properties, and those 30 properties sit within, let's just say, maybe they're spread out and they sit in 5 different counties. What? When you start talking about that, when you start drilling down into all of the different levels, it's going to be like impossible. And then so who double checks that, right? So you're relying on your marketing manager to ensure that they're double checking all of those county codes. That's just not something that seems feasible to me, at least. So a lot of it has been these kind of more top down plays where it's like, okay, we're just not going to do this. Or if we are going to do this, we're going to use a set list of approved vendors that are very much aware of what our standards are going to be and how we want to structure the campaigns and what we are allowed to target. And in those cases, those vendor partners become an extra arm, if you will. And so I think that's another, kind of control aspect of it is if I say, hey, I want to do this, the vendor's going to say, you can't. That's not a thing that we do because of this, kind of sweeping statement. So I think it's been more of that. It's just so, it's a lot. It's time consuming and it's very cumbersome. So I don't necessarily think there's a lot of gray area per se with like when you actually read it. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a lawyer. But when I have had different, things explained to me, it makes perfect sense. But then there's always these questions. I remember getting a class on what type of photos I can use with stock photos and if the person has to be in focus or not, things like that. So.
Yeah, totally. The disparate impact is an interesting one, but for the sake of time, we'll come back to you on that one, Michelle. So David, you're up for another one of your lightning round.
Yeah.
Left field.
Well, let's stay on this similar thread, but I'm going to say, do you have any hot takes on anything? So meaning anything within property management, that could be marketing, that could be operation specific, but you're familiar with a hot take, yeah?
Sort of.
Do you just have anything that like goes against the grain? Like, so goes against the grain.
I'm sure I do. I don't know what that is.
Well, why don't we let's tee it up. Let's let Reid give one of his hot takes. He's got like 100 of them, and then that'll be your guiding example.
Well, I guess it's a hot take, but people are coming around to the idea. I'll use the ILS, but that you should be always on more of those at a much lower level. I mean, you've heard this, Michelle, but I do see it as directories. It's like the MLS. It's like you just got to be found. But I think the best strategy there is not to get into, that's going to be crass. I guess I can be, but a pissing match, with like diamonds and platinums and diamond pluses and things like that, that you're way better off spreading yourself thin. And that's the hot take. Most people be like, are you crazy? Like a bunch of silvers, silvers and golds. That's never going to work. I think that's the best way to generate higher quality because you're harder to find. So my hot take is the harder you are to find an ILS, the better, but you better still be able to be found. So as they filter down, it's like you got a super high quality lead. And if you diversify that collectively, that adds up to the same volume of leads that you get if you were just on that diamond on apartments.com. So I think quality lead goes up. You can maintain lead volume and potentially spend the same amount of money. Hot take.
There you go.
I don't know. I really am drawing a blank. I knew as soon as you started talking that was probably going to be your hot take when you mentioned it. But, oh my gosh, I have no earthly clue. I might think of one.
Sorry, yeah, no problem.
Another. I was just going to say another. Almost an infamous now hot take for me was Bing, which David was on board with, but we both have been outspoken. I don't know if it's advocates, but just feel like Bing has not been given its due, or that there's more opportunity there than people realize. And when we did test it, because I was all over our paid media director, I was like, I want to test Bing, and we did. And I know, Michelle, you've had some experience with Bing, but we saw better results, lower cost per click, lower cost per lead,
better site engagement.
Everything was better, but yet it was because the attribution was so difficult, as well as there was some speculation. I don't know if it's coming from you, just about bot traffic, and so we pulled back from it, but. Just the idea that all search has to go to Google, part of me is just, I'm always full of hot takes. So I didn't like hearing that or thinking that, but that was another one. Just trying to give you, I guess, more time.
I appreciate it. I'm seriously drawing a blank, but who knows? Maybe I'll figure one out and I will give you a hot take in the future.
I think your hot take is definitely Waze. It seems like you're on that train. You're running your own campaign.
No. Oh, I don't like it. It didn't work. So, I mean, no. If you want to talk about hot takes, I can tell you. Snapchat was one that I tried and I decided did not work because it was a lot of the, we call it the fat thumb effect, if you will. It was the quick slide up instead of the slide over. And so you would get a ton of visits to your website, but they would last for not even a second. Like it was an almost immediate bounce. And so it just it never really panned out. So in terms of like even a trackable, like, oh, I got this much. It's just one of those that you're like, yeah, you got 1,500 like swipe ups, but how many actually like looked at your website for more than a second, more than just the accidental. So I'd say I've tried it. I don't think it necessarily works, but
Yeah, I think with you, Michelle, from our conversations, I think whenever you have something that may be a hot take, you test it and are able to prove in your own mind, yes or no. And so you may think of it as less of a hot take versus some of the things Reid's mentioning are still things that we're looking to prove out. We have some data, but it's not conclusive enough, at least yet, to hit scale. But I would say, like, I know you have some opinions on the different website widgets and things that can happen. So I'm not going to make you go there, but I just know that you have some hot takes about some of the different.
I mean, I do. I mean, I have hot takes, but those are, I don't know.
Well, one of my other hot takes is disparate impact. Well, all right, never mind. This isn't about me.
You started it though.
I know. I gotta stop right there. All right, back to classic, questions, I guess. So let's jump into social media.
Yeah.
Since we, it's probably a good segue, right? We're talking there about fair housing, and what we're seeing as a trend, and this is internal, but it's with a pretty good size footprint now. A lot more interest being paid to organic social than maybe we had anticipated. So talk us through your thoughts around paid social and organic. And I don't know, since sitting in the chair, digital director of digital strategy, how much or how you're thinking about those, like as you talk through it with your stakeholders. Is there like a clear relationship to you that you usually like try to communicate, or do you separate them for the sake of simplicity, and you also think they are really entirely different? So give us your thoughts on paid and organic social.
Yeah. So I think that from where I sit, I really just focus on the paid aspect. So that's what I'm talking about the most. I'm talking about how do we drive traffic to the property? How do we get those leases? How do we get those, leads in the door and touring? I think from the organic side, maybe this is a hot take of mine, but I've always felt that it's more for the resident base, if you will, for more of that retention aspect. We always kind of positioned it as like, it's your kind of community message board, and it's where you want your fans, your followers, your residents to interact with you. So I think that organic is different. What you do it with organic posting versus how you leverage your paid social campaigns, I think are very different. From just my marketing background, I love organic social media. I love for it to be authentic and for it to be real and for it to be extensive, because I like for that page, I want that page to look good for if there is a prospect, right, that has seen an ad. And then they go to our website and then they want to check out the Facebook or the Instagram. I want them to see us in a positive light. I use this example, actually. I taught a social media class one day to on-site team members who were actually posting for the properties. And I said, I was actually getting ready to go on my honeymoon to Hawaii, and I was booking hotels. I don't use a travel planner, coordinator, or anything like that. Like, I do it all myself because I'm a crazy person. And I was knee deep in Maui hotels, and I wanted a nice hotel. I wanted a nice hotel with an awesome pool. I wanted to have drinks by the pool. I wanted a beach right next to me. I wanted the works. And I remember I narrowed it down to 3, and all their websites looked great. They all had great reviews on Google, on like TripAdvisor, all of those. And then what actually sealed the deal for me was I went to their Instagram pages. I found more pictures and more engagement on one of them, and that's how I made my decision. And so I realized in that moment how absolutely important it was, because it was the Westin in Maui, and they had a post of like they were teaching kids how to hula dance, and I just thought that was the cutest thing in the world. I was like, they have activities, they have things, they have this awesome pool, they got a pool bar, like I'm totally in, I'm sold. Whereas the other places, it looked like they had those things, but there was no activation. It didn't seem like it was lively. It didn't seem like it was going to be a good spot. So, and I'm sure they were all probably just as nice, but that's what sealed the deal. And so like, that's how I think of organic social, is that our pages should really be a way for us to interact and connect with our residents and our fans and our followers. But it should also be, it's almost like your own listing, if you will. When someone who isn't familiar with you comes to your page, you want them to be wowed and you want them to be impressed because you want them to take that next action and say, like, I'm ready to actually request information from this community because it looks like it'd be really fun to live there, or a great opportunity, whatever, a great solution.
Well, we totally agree with you. And it is a bit of a hot take from most other, I'll say, marketers or owners. But we fully say we. Yes, on that one. Yeah. Okay. The other thing is, Nicole and I are going to Hawaii in September. So I'll have to get recommendations from you and Reid, since Reid also loves Hawaii.
So
you weren't supposed to go.
I'm a little
going with you.
I told Nicole I wanted to go to like Thailand, and she's like, COVID, I don't know. So then she was like, Hawaii, and in our flight tickets, because this whole thing that's going down was like, I think it was like $300 plus she flies because of the Southwest thing. So I was like, why not?
So
do island hop?
We don't. We just booked the flight because it's $300 for the two of us. So it was like, this is good.
Figure out.
I will send you. Remind me. I have a spreadsheet of my close friends, my colleagues know this about me, but when I travel, I have a 10-page spreadsheet that I create every time. And I did one for Hawaii. We went to 3 different islands. I have every excursion or interest point. And I also have maps. I have Google Maps that you can use when you're not on cell service. So I did that for Ireland and London and everything too. So, just remind me. I love it.
God bless your husband, Michelle.
He's just learned now. He just knows. And I require at least one Barnes and Noble day from him, where we go to Barnes and Noble and I have the computer and he gets a stack of the travel books and he goes through and I go, you tell me what you see and I'll enter it and then we can research it later. He knows.
Wow.
He's learned, but he's always excited about it because it always turns out to be a great time. So.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm just giving you a hard time. It's better to be an over planner, that's for sure. All right. Well, I had one more, and it's you mentioned that you focused a little bit more on paid, but that was specific to social media. And then we can wrap up with just either more lightning round questions or any last words that you want to give us. But SEO. So that's another one that I feel like just kind of, it's like a pendulum, on how much attention it's getting in the industry. But for us, again, just speaking from our own agency, there's been a lot more, I guess, focus on it, and I guess changing in the way people think about it. And I'm sure some of that is just the way that we talk about it. But what's your opinion there? Like, and maybe slightly tee you up on this, but I often will say, putting a little bit more attention there is going to make your money work smarter, not harder. Because, too often it's like, oh, let's throw, another platform at it and see if that works. And a lot of times there's an underlying issue there, like with conversions that people aren't really paying attention to. And that's where SEO can really, play a factor. But I know similar to ILSs, like depending on which CMS you're on, there's limitations, there's restrictions. And so there isn't as much freedom, I guess, to get creative with, the conversion rate optimization or the content and things like that. So, but then there's also off-site SEO. So it's not always about what's happening on-site. So yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts? Give us your thoughts on SEO.
I think it's important. I think that it is starting to probably come around now. I think, again, it's one of those educational things as the industry learns. So the way that paid search came into play, it was like, hey, you spend this money, you get immediate leads. And then he said, hey, there's this really cool thing called SEO. And then again, the client was like, well, where are my leads? And so it's one of those things that it's impossible to explain that way. So it's been very difficult. But I think what's happened over the years is partners, agencies, and providers have developed kind of these packages, if you will, that allow for a little bit of that on-site and off-site SEO. And it fits the need of the moment. And so I think it's probably gaining more traction that way. I've talked to digital providers, like not multifamily related at all. And I've asked for SEO quotes and I've gotten really large quotes. And I'm like, there's no way. I will never do that. I'm so sorry, but no. And then there's, but then there's these like packages that have now become available, or it's a quick little add-on. And I think that that's made it a little bit easier to swallow over recent, but I do think it's important. I agree. I think that if you have a great performing website and if your back end is solid, then yes, you should have a better time at converting, as long as your campaigns are targeting the right people and all of that fun stuff. You should have better conversions, and you should your money should go a little bit further. So fully on board with paying for SEO services. I think that what those services include is important, and determining what the need is for the property. One of the things that I have seen most recently, and I'm just going to go here because I think you kind of started to, is like GMB, for example. So the Google My Business listing we know it's a huge thing. And we know that it's really important and that Google likes Google products. And so one of the most recent things I've seen is that these SEO packages include like Google My Business posts, or it's an add-on to a current campaign you already have. Maybe you don't get a SEO package, but you do get, along with your paid search campaign, we can go ahead and do so many posts for you a month on Google My Business. Or we even have told our on-site teams to post to Google My Business. Because of how much weight that carries. So I think that's interesting, and that's also a good one. I appreciate. I'm all about I know, David, you said earlier, who wants to make Google more rich and, all of that stuff. But I mean, I understand why Google is what Google is, and appreciate it. And so when Google likes Google products and it's an easy ad for me, I'm all in for it. Why not? Why not try it? Why not give it a whirl and see how it goes? So yeah, if that answers the question, I think it's important.
No, it does. I appreciate that. I think the two hardest things, and why we don't see maybe more, well, three, and you named one of them for sure, but you named two out of the three, is the constrained budgets, which, I mean, it when you're working on $2-3 grand, like, is there enough, and should you put focus on SEO? But the two that I guess gravitate towards more is the accountability. So how do we, hold our dollars accountable? And that just ties right into progress and how to quantify progress. So there's often low-hanging fruit, at least we've seen, like from a technical standpoint, but then it gets much more challenging if it's like, yeah, we dropped $500 this month, and we'll do it a couple more months, and then all our metadata is optimized, and we have our pages, a few more pages indexed, whatever. But then where do we go from here? And then how do we quantify the ROI in that? So that's where it gets hard. But that's just to really agree or validate what you're saying, Michelle. You often, this is a hot foot for a lot of reasons, but do you want to take this any further or add to this? Another thing that comes up, and maybe this will tee you up, is a lot of people say it's a waste of money because we're never going to rank. But if you can get them thinking past just where they rank, then they usually lean in.
Yeah, my hot take on SEO is I call it the SEO tax. So I think you may have heard that from me before, Michelle, but I just don't like the SEO, I'll say, packages or charges that are more traditional in this industry, or they just feel like a tax on the apartment. Not that they're really providing a lot of value, but I think that there is a lot of value in SEO if done correctly with those constraints. And we often internally talk about like the constraints of this industry equal creativity, right? Like if you tell someone like you can do anything, they tend to be less creative than if you put all these rules on them, and then they get creative within the rules, within the sandbox. So that's during our hiring process. That's what we talk to people about.
And I would say, one thing that you mentioned, Reid, and you also just mentioned, is the constraints of especially when it comes to the websites. That's something that's very difficult, I think, still, just because of how much or how little play we have there. So we find ourselves, doing different things. There's lots of different programs out there that you can add on to your website, if you will, to help increase conversions or to offer additional services, whether that be like a virtual tour or a scheduler or anything like that. So I think maybe that's kind of where some of the creativity comes into. But also, I think that SEO with our constraints from our websites it's difficult. It's really hard. And so sometimes it's really hard to say like, yeah, I want to spend money on this, because it's like, but you guys, even if you give me like things to change, chances of me being able to change even half of them are, so it does depend. I think it really depends, but yeah.
Yeah, I think I would put priority on the local SEO stuff like Google My Business and your Google Maps and all that, because the ILSs can't touch you there. Like they can't get on the Google Map. And if you look at your Google Insights from your Google My Business page, you'll see that most properties are getting most of their impressions from the map. Searches than they are the SERP results. So that's where I put my focus, and you could get that done for relatively inexpensive, if not your own elbow grease. And then from there, then you can talk about doing some stuff on the site. So I think Reid makes a good point. Like, you can start ranking for some of these long tail keywords like Tesla charging stations in this zip code or something like, and that's worth it. But for a traditional property, even just making your Google search result listing more attractive to click, that matters. Because if you look at like the click-through rate on organic, it tends to be very low, but it's because all of the darn apartments, even if they are ranking, they all have the same meta description and meta title. And so it's like, well, why should I click on you versus them? So with some very easy tweaks for what you do rank for, you can double, if not triple, your click-through rate on the SERP results page. So there's value in the SEO, but again, I just am more, I'll say the SEO tax. I would definitely push your vendors more than what is typical. Like for these websites that include SEO packages, push them to make sure they're doing it, because a lot of times it's kind of, I'll sit around until I get a ticket on this.
And then
I was going to say that's another thing that's hard. And it's also hard because either it's hard to report on, right? It's hard to put that reporting together and kind of deliver that regularly. But even if you do deliver that regularly, it's not the first thing that's top of mind. Typically, because it is a lower cost than, let's say, your paid search campaign, it might get kind of buried in terms of what do we review when we're reviewing. So it's not necessarily, so it could be easy to be overlooked. And so, yeah, the provider could be sitting there just kind of hanging out, waiting. And the property, the marketing person, the whomever is running it might not even think to look at what that reporting looks like, or what was done or what wasn't done, or that kind of thing. Because it's just, it's not top of mind yet. I don't think we're still in the baby stages of that one.
Yeah, for sure. It requires patience, which a lot of, especially operators, don't have, but many of us don't. And then it takes being on them, which is unfortunate, but we're all set at, unless you are checking in, making sure a lot of that work is being done, and sometimes it can't even be done in the first place, then you end up 6 months later saying, what the hell did we just pay for? So it is a tough one, but I do think there's some good, I guess, tactics and maybe some good questions to ask as you're going through that process of vetting vendors and asking about SEO that will make you feel a little bit better about it. So we're bumping up on a couple of hours. I knew we were going to go a little long. Yeah. I have my token 5, exit lightning round questions, but I want to make sure before I ask these, if you had any other zingers that you wanted to get out.
Well, mine is more of I'll hit Michelle with it anyways. I'm curious who you really look up to in the industry, Michelle, who you think we should reach out to also try to get on and grill them with some questions.
And you can't say your boss.
Oh. Oh, goodness gracious. There's a lot. I've met a lot of incredible.
It doesn't have to be marketing.
I mean, that makes it even harder. Are you kidding me? I have met some incredible people, especially operators. I will tell you, some of the operators that I've had the ability to work with, I am mind blown. I learn something new every
Let's
day.
do that then. We have a great network of marketers. So why don't you hit us with an operator that you think is out of this world?
An operator that I think is out of this world. Okay, so Lydia Bishop is a managing director with Greystar. She's in Florida, and I used to work with her in Orlando, and I think she is absolutely incredible. She's been doing this for such a long time, and she is so stinking smart when it comes to, I mean, gosh, I loved being a fly on the wall, if you will, when I was inviting into meetings with clients to talk about developments or to talk about, property operations. The amount of knowledge that she has is just, it's crazy. And it's so quick, especially, when it comes to numbers. And I'm always amazed at our operators when they set rents. That's the most impressive thing to me ever. I just am like, oh my gosh, how do you do this? But I loved being able to listen to her talk through like pre-development stuff with clients and just talk about how you position an asset, how you price an asset. And then even like, I love it when our operators give feedback to developers about like, you need to put a USB charging station like here. Or have you thought about doing this type of sink instead? Like small little things like that, but they've learned over the years, like drive value. So it's really, really cool. So she's probably one of my favorites. But I've worked with so many. And then on the marketing side, I know you guys know Andrew Halverson very well, but I've always enjoyed my conversations with Andrew Halverson. He has a great amount of knowledge, and he's just a lot of fun to talk to about all of the things. So I always enjoy talking to him and picking his brain on different things.
Was the last time we saw Andrew in person at the drag show?
No.
It doesn't surprise me if it was.
No. Oh yeah. No, we saw him at Optech. He came by.
Oh, did we?
Yeah. He spent about 20 minutes with us.
Yeah. Andrew's great, but I just love teasing Reid because he took Reid to a drag show. Well,
he took us
to a drag show.
Yeah. He just had fun, particularly calling me out or putting me in a couple awkward positions.
Yeah. My very first my second week on the job, I think I went to a drag show with Andrew Halverson. So
part of initiate.
So he's very fun. But he was always someone that I loved talking to, and I loved I love the what if scenarios and to try to figure out how's what if we did this and then this went this way and then this did this and then could we track this like this? Lots of those conversations I've had over the years.
Yeah, he became, and maybe it was always in his DNA to become a digital junkie, but that's the way I looked at him. And that's why he and David, got along so well so quickly is he saw that in David, and that spurred all sorts of new ideas. And it's fun to kind of pay that forward. And I feel in a way, Michelle, that, we've seen that with you where you've had exposure to, for lack of a better word or term, like digital junkies. And it's really helped accelerate your development, and you've helped you ask better questions, harder questions, and also think about new applications and opportunities. And that it's just, I love seeing that kind of ripple effect. Mm-hmm. And I've benefited, I said time with David, and he's benefited from me. I mean, our minds work differently, but we have a lot of overlap. But it's fun to be in a room with those types of people. So, I'm just really excited for, what's happened in your career. And I think, showing that curiosity and being, willing to be that fly in the wall, because sometimes people have a hard time just, sitting and absorbing, but you have a nice balance of that. So it's great. I'm going to actually just ask one of these questions, and if you want, you can, keep going, but I've delayed, I'm late for another meeting, but Yeah, I really want to hear her answer on all these, but I'm just going to go to my go-to. You know which one that is? Like,
Not in a
kind of off the cuff. I asked these on all the interviews too.
I know. I'm trying to think of which one you would apply to, like a non-employee interview.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
Well, I'll just say it. Okay, what would your
I
last
knew it was
meal
going to be
be?
this one. I had a feeling.
Yeah. So, and hopefully the separation, I think it's usually pretty clear to people, and then if you were forced to eat the same meal over and over for the rest of your life, what would it be? So you got one meal left. And then what if you had to eat the same meal every day for the rest of your life?
Okay, so I have a question. For my meal, can it be as many things as I want, my last meal? Or does it have to be like a standard, like just you get a meal?
That's the first time I've ever been asked that. That's pretty clever.
I'm going to give you both answers.
I'll say it could be. I'll let her go 3 courses, even if they're all 3.
Okay, look. So if I was going to pick like a meal, okay, it would probably be chicken parm, pasta, garlic bread.
Oh, yeah.
Garlic bread with marinara has to be like the thing. So that would be like probably I think that's my probably last meal. Now, if I was going to like expand on it and like put everything, I would do like a little bit of like a bite by bite meal together where it would have a bite of chicken parm, some tacos. Let's see, maybe Chipotle. I really love some Chipotle bowls. Fried chicken, like from one of the local places here in Charlotte. I would totally get some fried chicken, or Publix. They also make really, really good fried chicken. Mac and cheese. And some sort of bread, because I like bread. And then, of course, like for dessert, it's always going to be cheesecake. Always. That's my thing. So that's my answer.
Well, obviously, you're leading a low-calorie last.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, if it's my last meal, I'm going out with a bang. Duh. But no, for my everyday meal, everyday meal is sandwiches and chips. Easy. I actually, in fact, eat that most days. I make a wrap for myself at home, probably 4 out of the 5 like working days of the week. Easy.
And what's typically in the wrap?
It's when I make it at home, it's just ham and cheese, and it's either Munster or Gouda. And then it's like lettuce, tomato, onion. I'm also a huge fan of vinegar and oil on like subs and things. I don't do like the mayo or the mustard thing. And then that's also like, if I get a sub out, that's typically what it is, or an Italian, because I do really like pepperoni and salami a lot. So.
Well, I don't know if it's because it's late in the day, but this is the hungriest I've ever gotten hearing the
It's because I eat delicious food. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I'm all about the Munster and the Gouda. Those are great cheeses. So yeah.
I felt like she lit up more about sandwiches than she has about anything else on this chat. So I feel like Michelle needs to open a deli.
Yes.
So I actually talked to my brother about this. We used to talk about, we would open a sandwich shop one day. My oldest brother, who got me into multifamily, we used to do fancy panini nights, where we would go to the store and we get like fancy meats, fancy cheeses, and then we try different combinations. One of my favorite paninis is jelly, goat cheese, apple slices, ham, and spinach, and then you press it, and it's incredible.
I would never in a million years put those.
I wouldn't have ordered
together.
it.
As soon as you said jelly.
I just ate that last week for lunch one day. Goat cheese, jelly, and ham, and I pressed it. Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna she's gonna have to make that. Is all I'm saying.
When she's here.
Yeah, I would never venture to do that by myself. So
we'll have to order a panini press for the Digible offices when Michelle comes to town.
Yeah,
I will make you some paninis that you'll be like, "Whoa, I love them."
Yeah. Oh, I bet. I have a panini machine, so I do love paninis, but I never have gotten that, off the beaten path with the ingredients. So that sounds really interesting.
It's good. Okay, so listen, real quick. Yeah. It's the jelly is the sweet, the goat cheese is the creamy and kind of more maybe sour, if you will. Then the apple has crisp or crunch. You can also exchange that for onion. You could do onion instead. And then ham is your meat, and then spinach because you need a little bit of green in there. It's the perfect. It's like a sweet savory thing.
Yeah.
Have you ever had like a Thanksgiving sandwich where it's like turkey, gravy, cranberry, stuffing?
Yep.
It's the same kind of concept.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah. And it isn't too uncommon, the jelly and the kind of, what was it? The cream goat cheese.
The goat cheese.
Yeah, that's not super uncommon. All right. Well, maybe I will. I'll call you up. I'll have you live, like in my hand, like if I go ahead and go for that. All right.
I think we're good.
What's that?
I think we're good.
Okay, cool. All right. So any last words, Michelle? This has been a blast, but anything else you want to get off your chest?
No, I don't think so. You guys ask really hard questions, and I'm sorry I didn't have plugs or hot takes prepared, but it was fun.
Well, no problem. We will get you on the next one for some of that stuff. So now you know what's coming. But also now you're Bishop and Halverson. They'll be pre-warned in a way of what may come.
God, if Lydia's going to be like, "What happened? What did you do to me?"
Yeah.
Oh, that's really
all right, Michelle. Well, thank you for spending a couple hours with us. This was a lot of fun. I know we learned a lot, and thank you for being our first call-in guest.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.